Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Come with me as we step into the deep, dark forest of fear, and let's hope that we see sunrise in the morning. Tonight's show is a compilation of extremely frightening and scary stories held in the deep, dark forests of the USA. Cryptid creature encounters galore, and I'm particularly excited about the end story, which I think you guys will absolutely enjoy as much as I had when I first read it. Of course, as ever, please do let me know down below in the comments. Please do like and share. Your support is always appreciated, and it has been absolutely amazing recently. Cannot thank you enough. Without further ado, guys, let's get into tonight's first story, entitled The Reason Why I Don't Drive There at Night Alone. Let's get straight into that. This is what happened to me one summer night. I'm not going to give the exact location for privacy reasons, but I can say it's a very religious state. I usually like to go on late night drives. This was a few years ago, around early June. I was on one of these drives in my Grand Jeep Cherokee. This was a well-maintained dirt road that leads to a place called Sandy Beach by the lake. A frequent hangout and hunting spot. I turned off the pavement expecting to see maybe a deer or some birds, so I was taking it fairly slow. Windows down and music up, just enjoying the warm night air. The moon was about half crescent and the stars were bright, for there was no buildings within 3 miles of this road. Once I came up to the parking lot, I was surprised to find that the road no longer went to the edge of the lake. Usually, you could drive right up to the water and a ways down to the beach. Either way, I stayed in the Jeep and just turned around. I wasn't far from the parking lot when I rounded a corner and I saw something in the road. To avoid hitting it, I slammed on my brakes. Dust covered the area as I sat idling. As the dust cleared, I saw a grotesque sight. Something that resembled a mangy black dog was in the middle of the road. It was staring right at me. Its eyes were glowing yellow in colour. I sat half frozen in fear and curiosity as to what the hell I was looking at. Now, I've heard the stories about skinwalkers and dogmen, but this didn't look like either. It was hunched over and extremely skinny, with a long bony tail. Its skin was an oily black with no hair that I could see. Its mouth was dripping with this black ooze. Its claws looked mangled. I don't know how long I was staring at this thing. All I know was that I couldn't move, as if its stare paralysed me. Everything else was quiet and I could only hear the blood rushing in my ears. At some point, it turned towards me, and in one leap it jumped onto the hood of my Jeep and stared through the windshield. I was completely paralysed with fear at this point. It slowly crawled up the windshield to open the sunroof, its yellowed eyes peering into my soul as it opened its mouth. Its breath smelled rotten. Its mangled teeth were black and oozing this oily substance. I could only stare in horror as it reached one of its mangled arms down through the roof. It got incredibly close to me. Something then snapped me out of the trance, and I remember I had the gas pedal, so I just floored it. The rear tyre spun in the dirt, trying desperately to grab a traction. I just turned my head towards the road as the car lurched forward hard. The thing on the roof tumbled along as I booked it out of there. I didn't even look in the rearview mirror the whole way to the pavement, in partial fear that it was giving chase. As soon as I hit the comforts of the pavement again, the tyres squealed and began smoking as I floored it the several miles back home. I was so terrified that I hardly slept that night. The next morning, I went outside to check on the Jeep, and that black ooze was still on the hood and windshield, confirming that it wasn't just some nightmare. It was thick and smelly. It had the consistency of oil, like bits of dirt or something in it. The smell was putrid and made me gag. I went inside and washed my hands, then immediately took the Jeep to a car wash. To this day, I can still smell that stench. If anyone has any idea what it was, please let me know. I still don't know what I saw, and it gives me chills still to talk about it. Northern California Woods Encounter. I'm an 18-year-old male, and this took place last summer in June. I went camping in the woods in Northern California, which I was told were a beautiful place if you want to get away from the big cities. My friend and I had saved up the money to spend 2 weeks in a pretty big cabin next to a decent-sized lake. We drove about 3.5 hours to our destination and were in awe of how awesome the area was. Our first day was spent setting things up in the cabin, such as kitchen supplies, beds, a way to keep clothes warm, medicine, and a place to store the guns we brought. It should be noted that there were 7 of us, and we had brought about 3 .22 rifles that were from my side of things, and a 44 and a 3-lever actions. If you were to ask us why we went to such extreme lengths to be armed, it was because we were told by people that bears and mountain lions would always be in the area, and that a family had a bad run-in with a lion that hospitalised one of the kids, who somehow survived the encounter, but I digress. Anyway, we had just finished preparing things, so me and my 2 friends went out to the lake to scout out the area for fishing tomorrow. The lake was very clear, and we saw fish such as trout, bluegill, bass, and the occasional carp. We were walking back when we thought we saw something across the lake. The figure had been moving behind some trees and didn't seem to notice us, until my friend accidentally made a lot of branches fall into the water. Like I said, there were dangerous animals around the area, so we walked pretty fast to the cabin. We didn't tell the rest of the group what we saw, as we didn't want the camping to be cut short by a few days. We shrugged it off and all we went to bed. The next 3 days were uneventful and full of fun activities, and for me, some alone time with a female in bed. On the Saturday, me and the 2 guys in the group got our rifles and went hunting for small game. As we were going to make lunch and save for the rest of dinner, we walked around the area we had seen the figure a few days ago, and were hoping it had moved on and there were small animals in the area. After walking up a hill and getting to the top, we sat down. We were talking about how we should have gone fishing, when my friend gets hit in the chest with a rock that makes him swear and hold his chest. Me and the other guy, James, go to look at it, when the other rock flies by us and misses us. We thought it was one of the other girls playing a crude joke, but what we all saw made us get back to the cabin and lock it down for the remainder of our stay. It was large, hairy, and had the biggest teeth I had ever seen on something like it. The guys flipped out and sprinted down the hill, shouting across the lake for everyone to get inside the cabin. We could hear growling from where we were, and James flipped around really fast to shoot his 44 in a direction to scare whatever it was away. When we got back, all we heard was the rest of the group panicking and scared to hell. "What was that? That was not a bear or a lion. It's the same damn thing we saw on the first day," James said, as he was probably the most afraid out of all of us. The girls ran inside after us and locked the door and put the unused table in front of the door. That night, everyone stayed up around the fireplace and began talking about possibly going home in 2 to 3 days. As we were talking, we heard branches breaking and a splash of water coming from the lake area, which is about 500 feet away from the cabin. Guns were drawn and we all hid away from the windows. Silence followed, and the girls really wanted to go home, away from the area. The silence that had lasted 5 minutes was broken by loud thumps coming from all directions. The girls screamed and all 3 of us and the guys shouted and made a lot of noise, which seemed to work for a hot minute. And that was when a large log came bursting through the window. Out of fear, I wildly shot my 22 at the area. I hit something and saw a large figure sort of jog away from the area. I quickly boarded up the window and huddled everyone upstairs. And for the rest of the night, we were on edge and scared, and one of the girls began to cry hard. When morning came, we opened the door to see the side of the cabin had scratches and cracks in the wall. There were footprints leading to the edge of the lake, but there were more than one set. It looked like there was a group of whatever it was outside. So we packed our stuff and got ready to leave. We had to drive around 6 p.m, and as we were driving away, we saw another car in the area with people who said they also had an encounter with the mystery animals and had to also flee the area. Our group hasn't gone back to the area since, and we all still talk about it to this day. Scariest damn thing that happened to me, and I don't know what those things were. Thing in The woods. Let's get straight into that. This is 100% true. I'm a 21-year-old female. My brother is 19. And he absolutely loves going for walks in the woods. So, for his birthday last year, I planned a day away for me and him. We would go to the woods and camp out there. He's never been camping before, so I thought he might enjoy it. And we could do it more often. So, it was a Saturday evening, I think. We packed our stuff and headed off, leaving our phones and all electronic devices behind. Bad idea. Anyways, off we went. The walk started off like any other. We went deep into the woods, just so we wouldn't have to talk to any people. As we were walking, we could both hear strange noises. Not noises like branches breaking or footsteps. It was like a static noise. I know it sounds weird, but it's the only way I can describe it. My brother heard it first. When we stopped, it stopped. I thought it could just be the sound of birds or something like that, so we continued on, thinking nothing of it. When we were about an hour into the walk, my brother stopped dead in his tracks. I looked at him really confused because I didn't know why he'd stopped. He just looked straight ahead down the path. I turned my head slowly, not sure of what I was about to see. I looked in the direction he was looking, but I couldn't see anything. Nothing but the trees on either side of the path. I asked him what he was looking at, but he didn't answer. At this stage, I was getting kind of anxious. What was he staring at? Why couldn't I see it? I stood in front of him to block him from looking at whatever it was. I shouted at him to snap out of it, and he finally did. This is how the conversation went. What were you staring at? I shouted at him. You didn't see it? See what? How could you not see it? It was standing in the middle of the path. See what? I shouted a lot louder than I probably should have. The thing, it was like 6 feet tall. How did you not see it? It was standing right there. How did you miss it? I didn't speak because we both heard the static sound again. It was coming from right behind me. I ran. I'm ashamed to say this, but I ran faster than I ever had and probably ever will. I looked back, still running, but my brother, he wasn't there. I stopped. I hadn't heard him running behind me, so where'd he go? I was in full panic mode, hyperventilating. I shouted his name a few times but didn't want to shout too loud to attract whatever that thing was. The birds had stopped chirping and the trees had stopped swaying. All there was silence, and it was deafening. I have never been more terrified in my life. Where was my brother? What in the world was that? What do I do now? So many thoughts rushed through my head. I had to look for him. I couldn't leave without him. So I walked slowly, making sure not to step on any twigs. Looking at the tree line, nothing. It was at this point I knew I should have brought my phone, but hours I stayed out there looking for him. Hours, not hearing a sound, not seeing a thing. I think I walked around for miles looking for him. After 3 hours of looking, I found him. 5 miles from where I'd last seen him. 5 miles. He was curled up under a tree with his legs tucked under him, rocking back and forth. This is an 18-year-old boy we're talking about here, and sobbing like a baby, unable to comprehend words. I ran over to him and this is what we said. Oh my God, where have you been? I've been all looking for you for hours. What happened? Where did you go? What was that? Do you remember anything? I was bombarding him with questions, but all he could do was look at me. After about 5 minutes of trying to get him to speak to me, he finally said something that sent chills down my spine. He said,
"We have to go and never come back."
At this point I was fucking horrified. What in the name of Jesus was he talking about? I managed to get him up after 20 minutes and we started the 6-ish mile walk back. Again, it took hours. With me shit scared of every sound, the further we walked, the more my brother became around. Eventually, we began to jog a bit, obviously wanting to get the fuck out of there. The worst noise I'd ever heard filled the woods. The static. We looked at each other and bolted. I mean, we bolted. The static got louder and I thought I was about to black out. My chest was on fire. I couldn't feel my legs anymore, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there, so badly. I never wanted something so badly in my life. Finally, after hours of walking, jogging, fucking sprinting like Usain Bolt, we did it. We made it out to the woods and we drove home in silence, never to discuss what happened that day ever again. We got home and I cried in my room. I cried myself to sleep. I didn't sleep well for the next month and I will never forget that experience. My brother has never told me what he saw that day, and I'm not sure that I want to know. So, if you ever Hear static noises in the woods. Get out of there, and fast. The Field Stalker, Indiana. These events took place almost 20 years ago in Indiana, where I grew up. My father lived about an hour outside of Indianapolis, in the middle of nowhere, and I would visit him over the weekends as a kid. It was nice, quiet town, and he lived on a large piece of land. Vast, rolling fields stretched as far as my vision carried, with deep, lively forests encompassing them on nearly every side. Some of my best memories were spent hunting and working outside with my old man, breathing in the crisp country air that sat, undisturbed by hustle and bustle of the city. It would have been the perfect place had it not been for that thing that inhabited the land. I still remember the first time I saw it. I was as sick as a dog when my father yelled out, "Put those chickens up, boy," before shutting the door and making his way to the night shift. He had a few dozen chickens that he would use for his eggs and the occasional family dinner. They were always a lot of fun to chase around and play with as a child, but I digress. About an hour after he left, I was able to force myself out of bed, my sinuses congested and head throbbing. I made my way out to the back door. Night was starting to fall as I rounded up all my little feathery friends into the coop before closing and barring the door. I glanced to my right at the enormous fields that stretched out to my sight to see a storm roaring way off in the distance. With such a huge area providing an open sky, any storm within dozens of miles could be seen as flashes of lightning rang silent and illuminated the entire property with each flicker. I sat there, mesmerised by the beauty, before something caught my eye. It first appeared as a flash of lightning. A good distance away, but a few seconds later, it was much closer, and I made out a grotesque shape tearing through the fields parallel to me. It wore skin so pale that it glowed a faint blue in the moonlight. Its limbs were jagged and disproportionate to the body. One leg seemed longer than the other, and its arms were clenched against its body, like a praying mantis. Long, wispy fingers hung down as it strode through the blackness. I sat there, and a place of fear gripped me tightly. This thing was gaining distance so fast. With each sporadic interval of lightning, it seemed to gain hundreds of feet. It wasn't until a particularly long stretch of lightning strikes that I got a good look at it, in a way that still pops up in my nightmares. Its body trembled and convulsed as it glided across the grass, its longer leg being made apparent as its sprint resembled more of a limp, but a limp that had been speeding at over 30, maybe 40 miles per hour. The one thing that stuck out more than anything was that this absolute silence. It was running by at an inhuman speed, as its joints bent and twisted begrudgingly, but it never made one sound. Each step was completely devoid of any noise, though it looked like its body hurt to move. It was as if it wasn't even there. With each flash of lightning, it gained an impossible amount of ground, and before I knew it, it was gone. It dissolved into the faraway tree line without any disturbance. I ran back inside crying to my dad's girlfriend and was probably babbling incoherently as she tried to calm me down. I spent the rest of the night on the couch in fear, watching sitcoms with my future stepmother. For the next several months, what was normally a trip that I looked forward to was now one that stewed anxiety in my gut, as I dreaded possibly seeing that thing again. But as I came and went dozens of times, I hadn't encountered it, and I was beginning to wonder if it was just a strange trick of the light, as I was extremely sick at the time of seeing it. Fast forward a few years, and I was just entering high school, and my father's house was a great place to have gatherings with friends, as we had bonfires, cookouts, football games, you name it. I had all but forgotten my experience, and my dad's home was once again a destination that I spent the entire week thinking about. Me and several friends, Wayne, Tim, Steve and Matt, had planned a time to go there. After waiting impatiently for a few weeks, the day had finally come to go out there. I was so excited to spend some time with my friends and Dad. We packed up all the essentials and made the trip without a hiccup. Once there, we proceeded to do all the reckless things a bunch of partially supervised 14-year-olds would do. After wearing ourselves out a bit, we started up a fire and chatted for a little while as the remainder of the day quickly passed. We talked about the typical things, sports, girls, etc. As the sun was starting to set, we were putting out the fire. Tim and Matt were feeding grass and fruits to an old horse that someone was paying my father to have set up in an enclosed area on his property. It was a very old horse named Jack, and it was pretty much just stood around all day, as it was old and broken down. It would barely be able to shuffle up to us to accept our offerings of food. Finish up playing with the horse, ladies, Wayne shouted at them as he shoveled dirt and ash onto the dying fire with his boot. It's time to get this started. Wayne was talking about playing flashlight tag. He enjoyed it a lot more than all of us and sometimes took it a little bit too seriously, but regardless, it was always a good time. We gathered up in the centre of the yard and played rock, paper, scissors to determine who would be first. The first person to be caught would end up being the next one it. All the basic rules like that. And Tim ended up being the first person it, and we watched him turn his head into the tree to begin his count to 60. Once his back faced us, we all scattered aimlessly into the dark. Racing around the huge yard, I found a large pile of old logs and firewood that I thought was a great hiding place. I was always the guy who tried to find the best hiding spot, rather than periodically move spots as the Seeker made the patrols. I knew this area like the back of my hand, so I considered that an advantage. 58, 59, 60! I heard Tim yell out as I saw the bright yellow glow of the flashlight pierce into the night. I sat there, still as a statue as Tim slowly paced around the yard, waving his flashlight in every direction, peeking through the logs. I had to stop myself from chuckling as I thought there was no way I would ever be found. I huddled up as tightly as I could and covered up any skin with all the loose shreds of clothing that hung off me. Just as I was settled in, I nearly had a heart attack as that horse abruptly cried out and began stomping around just 10 feet behind me. It was normally so slow and quiet that I hadn't even noticed it was standing in my vicinity before it lashed out. It surprised me so much that I jumped and caused a few of the logs surrounding me to tumble down. I saw the beam of light from Tim's hand swing over to me quickly as he briskly walked towards me. I was crouched down under the bunch of wood, so I really wasn't in any place to make a run for it, so I just waited to be caught. "Gotcha, man!" I heard Tim yell out triumphantly. "Haha, yeah man, I didn't think anyone would get me here," I said back. He came back with some juvenile trash talk and made my way back to the back porch, glancing back at the horse who was trotting around the electric fence nervously. I sat on the porch and sarcastically shouted, "You guys got this!" and "Woo! Go guys, keep it up!" as I waited, hoping I might get them to laugh and get caught so I could go get on with the next round. I heard the excited screams of those idiots as they were caught and the sounds of some attempting to move through the dark as subtly as possible while giggling to themselves. All this time, I couldn't help but look at the horse frequently to see it move around erratically, whinnying and snorting something I had never seen it do before. My round being it went relatively quickly, as I knew the area well and my friends even better. Matt was the first person I found, and he was laying face down on top of the red car while wearing all black, thinking he could have blended in. "Hey dumbass," I said as I shined the light over to his body. His face slowly turned towards me, as if to make sure I was actually talking to him. We laughed as he made his way to the porch. The rest of my round went quickly, and we sat around talking for a little bit before starting up again. Matt kind of started to complain that he didn't want to be it and started pouting. He could be a bit of a wimp back then, but eventually complied after having enough guys yelling "pussy" at him. A few minutes into the next round, I again nearly jumped out of my skin as that horse let out another outburst. Shortly after, I heard Matt's voice ringing out, "Guys, can we stop please? Seriously, I'm not kidding, please, get out here." I heard Steve yell out, "Yeah, right," from somewhere, and Wayne yell out, "Pussy!" and then once more, "Guys, I'm serious, please, I'm not kidding, please come out." He pleaded with us. After a few moments, I decided to come out, seeing that maybe he was a little bit spooked being so far out in the middle of the night. "What's up, dude?" I asked as I approached him. "I saw something. I don't know what it was, but I don't know. I just saw something weird," he said as Wayne and Steve emerged from the darkness. "What's up, man? You just trying to get out of being it?" Steve said. "Fuck you, man," Matt spat back at him. All right, Wayne calmed down the two. "I saw something. It looked kind of like a person, but it was pale and didn't have any hair or clothes," Matt said as he started to gain his composure. I felt my heart sink as I thought I remembered the thing I saw running through the fields years before. "What are you talking about, dude?" Wayne asked, seeming to get a little bit nervous. It was right then that Steve spoke out. "Wait a minute, where's Tim?" We all looked in each other's direction to make a quick head count, but we all went into a small panic. "Tim!" I called out of instinct and began quickly walking around the yard as the rest of us followed suit. That old horse was all but sprinting around the perimeter of its enclosure as we frantically called out to our friend. We had split up and were running at this point to find Tim. "Where the fuck is he?" I heard Wayne yell out in frustration as minutes piled on. What is happening? I said to myself as I made my way around an old, worn-down shed towards the back of the property. Just then, I heard the familiar voice of Tim.
Hey, I'm over here, man.
A huge wave of relief swept over me when I heard this, but when I looked up, I didn't see him anywhere. Hello? Tim? I called out. There was silence for about 10 seconds before the same phrase repeated itself.
Hey, I'm over here, man.
The voice seemed to come from every direction at once as I turned around over and over in desperation. Tim! I yelled out one more time before I looked towards the tree line, and something caught my eye maybe 50 feet away. A pale, disgusting figure stood out in the open just in front of the tree line. Its arms clenched tightly against its chest as its twisted body appeared to barely be able to keep it standing. I sat there, frozen as I got to look at its face. It had no eyes, no ears or nose, no hair anywhere as it glowed, a shade of pale white blue in the moonlight. All that it showed was a huge mouth bearing a set of razor-sharp teeth that seemed to bend in a distorted smile. It opened its mouth.
Hey, I'm over here.
Slivered out in Tim's voice. I fell down to the ground, terrified. It stood there, facing me for what felt like hours before it turned and sprinted into the woods in a flash like before, making absolutely no sound. Moments after breaking through the tree line, an ear-splitting shriek erupted into the night that sounded as if it had blood and tar sloshing around in its lungs. This snapped me back out of my state, and I sprinted back to the house, and the horse had all but lost its mind at this point. I found the others waiting by the porch, some on their phones while Wayne was talking to my dad about what happened. A search party was conducted and persisted for over a week, but they never found Tim. I don't know what exactly happened to Tim, but I'm certain that the thing took him away from us. I stay up at night in guilt, wondering about his final thoughts and going over all the ways I could have saved him. I have never returned there, as my father sold the property and moved on after the incident. To this day, I wonder if it was that thing that made that horrible shriek, or if it was my friend Tim living his last moments. The North Tower. Let's get straight into that. April 4th, 2017. Henry, I'm back from the mountain. Here's your update as promised. First off, the plantings have taken hold quite well. I'd estimate 80% of them have taken root. Amazingly good for a first effort on such a desolate range. We should do a follow-up planting. I'm going to suggest we take advantage of it and add a bit of diversity, maybe some hardwoods and hardy shrubs to reduce the chance of a blight. I know it's a little early to be saying such things, but with a little luck, we could see a young forest on the south side within 10 years. As to the north side, I did as you asked and visited the fire tower. Rick was there, kinda. I can only describe his mood as distant. I mean, for a guy who has spent much of the winter alone, you would think he would have greeted us with a bit more, I don't know, excitement? When we got there, he barely bothered to greet us. I gave him the box of cookies, just like you said, and he didn't even give them one more of a glance. He eventually loosened it up a bit, and we got talking. Over the next few hours, he became more personable, more like Rick we had all known. But, I have to tell you, the whole time, he was distracted, almost like he was listening for something. The only time he showed any energy was a few hours after we got there, when we heard a loud crack out in the north face. Rick all but jumped out of his chair and had the most, well, I call it as I saw it. He looked frightened, spooked, and it's a wonder he didn't pull his rifle off the rack. He calmed down after a little while and said something about a bear prowling around. I don't know why that would spook him. We were all inside a stone tower after all. He got a bit edgy when we told him we were staying for the night, but that passed as well. Nothing happened, I will say. When we all gathered for breakfast, Rick was looking a bit drawn, like he hadn't slept, a wink. And he told me on the way down to the mountain that he'd woke up in the night and saw Rick sitting at the table, drinking coffee. I don't know what that was about. I guess what I'm trying to say is that you might want to get Rick out of there earlier than scheduled. He's looking pretty worn out. April 13th, 2017. Henry, Drew told me after I got back from the mountain that Rick had been getting irregular in his mid-morning radio check-ins. Seems that for the past month or so, Rick has missed a good third of them. Drew has to call him He tells me that Rick usually answers back right away, no more than a few minutes. When asked if there was a reason for this, all Rick would say is he was busy with other things. I didn't know what to make of this. Drew said Rick sounded tired much of the time and wondered if he had been sleeping in. He was writing it off as laziness, but I remembered Andy seeing him up in the middle of the night with a cup of coffee. Maybe that bear he mentioned has him up at night on the lookout. I'm concerned about this. If he's sleeping while he's supposed to be on watch, then we have a serious gap in our fire safety plan. I don't want to wake up one day and find out we've lost the entire north face of the mountain because Rick was afraid of a bear. We really need to do something about this. April 17th, 2017. Henry, I wanted to update you on the whole thing with Rick. Andy has decided to head back up to the tower and spend a few days with him. He thinks a little company might do Rick good, but we also want to keep an eye on him and find out what's going on. After I wrote to you last time, I ran into the guys who did the last supply run. Did I have a tale to tell? This was back in mid-March, when we had that week between the two storms. The three of them went up there on snowmobiles, one with a trailer full of supplies. When they got there, they found the tower unoccupied. Rick was nowhere to be seen. The door was wide open, the place was a mess. Like someone had a fight. They called out but got no response. As you might imagine, this worried them greatly. They were about to call in for help when Rick comes striding through the door. Buck naked. Surprises all around. When the other guys asked Rick what the hell was going on, he said something about taking a snow bath, which they said was bull as he was both dry and dirty. He also claimed to have not heard the sound of 3 snowmobiles approaching. It was also noted that he bore a number of scars that looked recent. One of the guys described them as claw marks, too many for a man to have survived. They all noted how he seemed unaffected by the cold despite his nakedness. None of this ever got reported officially because, well, they felt there was nothing to report. We all go a little bit flaky sometimes, one said. I'm worried about Rick. Everything I've seen and heard tells me he's not doing so well up there. He hasn't done anything rash or illegal, but his mind is in decline. He might walk out someday and get lost in the woods, even die of exposure. I don't know. He's experienced and had all the same training we had. Even so, when Andy said he was going up there, I didn't say no. Have you given any thought to my request that we get Rick out of there? I know we're short-staffed, but this is getting bad. April 19th, 2017. Henry, I've just heard from Andy. We have to do something about Rick. Andy left here right after breakfast, hiking with a full pack. When I said it seemed a bit much, he winked and said most of it was beer. Okay, fine. He wants to have some bro time with Rick. Even with the half a case in his bag, I figured he'd be there by mid-afternoon. When I didn't hear by sundown, I got worried. Drew tried to reach Rick on the radio, but got nothing. It wasn't until right after dark, an hour or so later, that Andy checked in. Rick wasn't at the tower. When I asked why he was late in arriving, Andy told me he'd had some trouble on the trail, but wouldn't say what. I bet he was dipping into those beers a little early. Maybe I should have pressed the matter, but I was more worried about Rick. I was about to call for a search party when Andy got all quiet and said Rick was back. I told him to put Rick on the line, but he only whispered, later, gotta go, and signed off. He actually turned off the radio. I was ready to hike up there and give them both the business when the radio crackled to life again. And it was Rick. We're fine here. Everything's fine, he said in his flat tone. Put Andy on the line, I demanded. Andy's busy. He's busy. Busy doing what, Rick? What the hell is going on up there? Where are you? Pause. I was busy. Things to do. The mic stayed open, like he was holding down the button. Then there was this weird sound in the background. It sounded like someone vomiting. Rick! Who's that? Is that Andy? Is he all right? The mic was held open again. A rustling, like wind. Then Rick. Andy's all right. He's all right. It's late. Very late. Good night. And that was it. We tried raising them several more times tonight, but without success. Henry, are you going to answer any of these emails? April 21st, 2017. I don't know what you're playing at, Henry, but I have 2 missing men now. I already called the sheriff and am CCing this to the regional administrator. We couldn't get Andy or Rick on the radio that night, or all the next day. Drew stayed by the set the whole time, but only got the morning reports from the other stations. North Tower was silent. We did get something weird at sunset last night. Soon as the stars came out, the radio let out this loud, and I mean loud, patch of feedback for a good 10 seconds. I wasn't even in the room and I heard it. And when it stopped, there was a long stretch of something like the sound of crinkling paper. Then a voice that might have been Andy shouting from far away.
Run! Run! Run!
Then the mic went dead. We tried raising them again. No luck. It's first light here now, and I'm taking a party up to the tower. I've asked the sheriff to raise the search party and have it on standby in case there is a problem. I don't even know why I'm writing you this. You've been the worst, the useless. I've been filing a grievance with the commissioner. When I get back, you better hope to hell there's nothing wrong with either of those guys. April 22nd, 2017. Blood. Where was the blood? April 28th, 2017. Henry, I'm writing this to you from a hotel room in Reno. No doubt you've been informed of what happened in the last few days, either officially or what was on the news. I figured I should write down my side of the story, if only for my own benefit. I'm out, completely, fired on the spot by that jackass who showed up after all of it was over and tried to tell everyone it didn't happen. The way he treated Andy and Rick, he deserved to lose some teeth. I don't care. To hell with them all. I didn't even pack my stuff. I just got in my truck and drove till I got here. So, what happened? 4 of us left at first light. I brought the satellite phone so I could keep in contact with the ranger station on the trail. I also brought my .45 in case that bear showed up, or anything else. I had a feeling from the moment we hit the trail that we were walking into something bad. It was about noontime that we spotted the smoke, thin wisps coming over the mountain. We were less than an hour from the tower, so we pressed on. If there was a fire starting in the woods, we need to be there, both for its shelter and to coordinate firefighting efforts. One of the others noted how quiet things had got. He was right. I listened. Not a sound, no birds or wind or anything. All of a sudden I was feeling a chill right up my spine, and that's when we were attacked. I still don't know what it was. Big and dark and fast. It came out of the woods to our right and landed on Holly and tore right into her. She screamed like a banshee. It didn't make a sound. There was no growls or roars. All we could hear was her under it being ripped to pieces. I drew my gun and fired, and it jumped back and let go of her. I fired again and it ran into the woods. John ran to Holly, but it was too late. She was dead. Everyone freaked out a bit, and John wanted to go back, but we convinced him to press on. The others picked up Holly's body and wrapped it in a poncho and carried it while we kept watch on the woods and wished I'd brought more ammo. Not only had that thing been quiet, it didn't bleed a drop. I put 2 heavy slugs into it and it would have dropped a bear. We didn't run for the tower, not with a body, but we sure walked down fast. We arrived at the tower a bit more than a half hour later. First thing we noticed was that the tower didn't have a roof anymore. The top third was blown clear off, jagged like an explosion or really bad lightning strike. Its days at the tower watch station were over. And the smoke we'd seen wasn't coming from the tower. It was the woods, all right. A big patch about a mile away was gushing up in thick grey smoke. It looked ready to burst into flame. I pulled out the satellite phone and made a call to the county while John and Melinda lay Holly under a tree and went into the tower to look for Andy and Rick. Barely had I got someone on the line when I heard Melinda cry out. I pulled my gun and ran into the tower to find her and John staring at what remained of Andy. You won't need the details. Odds are the official report will say he died in a forest fire, something like that. All I'll tell you is, I'm glad he had that stupid Star Wars tattoo on his arm. It made him easier to identify. The main room of the tower was shambles. It looked like someone had a barroom brawl. Did Rick get drunk and go nuts and do this? There was Andy's pack and there was the unopened beer inside. The only person who might know was nowhere to be found. Next to the overturned table was a notebook, the pocket kinds that we all carry. It must have been Rick's. I picked it up as Melanie went outside to get some air, stuffed it in my inside of my shirt pocket for later. The phone rang. It was the county fire marshal. I confirmed the fire in the woods and asked it to get a spotter plane in the air ASAP. And that's when Melanie came back in a panic and said that Holly's body was gone. We all went outside, and sure enough, the spot under the tree was bare. None of us wondered if she was still alive and had wandered off. We saw her die. Something had come and taken her while we were in the tower. Something quiet. I got back on the horn and told the sheriff that we had a rabid bear on our hands, that it had killed Holly, and to send a team of armed deputies to the tower. I didn't dare tell them the truth. He might have thought we were panicking and not to have sent anyone at all. Then I had John and Melanie come into the tower, and we barricaded the door. For all I knew, that thing could climb the tower and come in through the ruined roof. But we had to do something. I found a tarp and put it over Andy's body, and we waited. Spotter plane made a pass about a half hour later, and the deputies arrived in a helicopter about an hour after that. I showed them Andy's body and told them how the bear dragged Holly off into the woods. As for Rick, none of us knew what happened to him. He hadn't been found by the time I left. And that's it, Henry. Thanks for all your help, and good luck explaining all of this to Andy's family. I'm watching the news as I write this, watching the reports of how the fire has spread like mad, burning the whole north face of the mountain, and how 3 members of the Forestry Service have gone missing, and how 4 deputies barely survived an encounter with a sick bear that somehow got away. Good luck with it all. Wow. Hope you guys enjoyed that set compilation of stories there. Very excited to get those out tonight. Read them last night. Hope you did enjoy them. As I say, please do let me know down below in the comments. As ever, please do share and like. And remember, if you haven't subscribed to DMT, smash the subscribe button and kick the notification bell into the stratosphere to stay up to date with all DMT content. And remember guys, if you're going hiking or camping in a deep, dark forest, keep your wits about you, your eyes and ears open, and above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.